Thank you for coming, everyone. I'm Koutitsas. I'm a software engineer, part of the payments team at HFM, and I have a special interest in observability and architecture. So everything works until it doesn't. This is a lessons learned talk about what a traffic spike revealed in a critical flow and what that taught us about building more resilient systems. We will use a concrete example that comes from a financial callback path, but the lesson is broader than that. It's about what happens when a business critical flow looks healthy on average, while underneath it is tightly coupled to shared infrastructure, downstream services, and the failure modes that only show up under pressure. So everything looked healthy. Dashboards were green, average latency looked normal, and nothing seemed alarming. We've all seen these dashboards. But the system weakness was hidden, because average metrics are very good at hiding fragility. A system can look stable in the average case, while in the critical path is already vulnerable to queuing, contention, dependency drag, and shared resource pressure. So a clear observability lesson in that is that green dashboards do not prove resilience. Then, when traffic spiked, the architecture told the truth. Response time suddenly increased, timeouts appeared, and shared infrastructure pressure surfaced. Downstream failures became local latency, and suddenly, the average view stopped being useful. The key insight here is that the system was not slow in isolation. It was slowed by what it depended on. Critical flows were affected by other services failing, connection limits, database pressure, outside the immediate local logic itself. The spike did not create the architectural weakness, it only exposed it. So the real value of the incident was that it forced us to look at the system as it actually behaved, not as the dashboards suggested it behaved. So that is why spikes are useful. They expose the real architecture, not the average case illusion. So if I reduce the problem to one sentence, it is this. There was too much hidden coupling inside the critical path. In our case, the critical path was the request we received back from payment providers after we initiate the payment flow. We call these callbacks. The service validates the request, but then inside the same response window, too much of the wider system was involved. Synchronous processing, business logic, shared dependencies and infrastructure, and downstream interactions. That meant the response path was not just doing local work. It was carrying the state of the wider system with it. And once that happens, the critical path becomes fragile in a way that average health metrics rarely make obvious. So this is the kind of graph that creates false confidence. If we only look at the average, the green line, the average response duration stays relatively calm. But the 95 percentile, the red one, tells a very different story. This is where instability shows up, and that is where the critical path starts to hurt. The request volume matters because it adds pressure, but the real lesson here is not just the traffic increased. It is that the average implied stability, while the tail revealed fragility. So this is the trap. Green-looking averages can remain acceptable, while the tail is already showing that shared pressure is degrading the critical flow. So some key and some clear engineering takeaways here are these. First, do not rely on average metrics. Average latency looked acceptable for too long, and that gave us false confidence. The real pain was in the tail, not in the average. So the second one is to optimize the slowest critical flows first. The important question was not what's our typical average latency, but which business-critical flows become unstable first when the system is under pressure. And if we want to optimize the slowest critical flows first, our testing has to reflect reality. That means load testing under pressure, but also failure testing. Happy path tests are not enough. We need tests that surface dependency drag, shared resource contention, and how critical flows behave when dependencies slow down or fail. Third one, heavy database transactions in the HTTP path are risky. Once expensive transactional work sits inside the response window, log duration, contention, and unpredictable latency all get worse under concurrency. So the fourth one was that connection management is a system concern. So this was not only about one service being slow, because shared pools, Redis, and database pressure all influence the critical flow. And the final one is idempotency must start early. If duplicate or wasteful work is only discovered late, the system has already spent scarce resources on it. So for me, those are the 5 lessons. Better health signals, better prioritization, shorter transactional paths, better shared resource discipline, and earlier protection. So this final one was one of the practical lessons we learned, that late failure discovery is expensive. In our case, duplicate handling often happened late. By the time the duplicate was identified, the request had already executed most of the path and consumed scarce resources. So correctness was preserved, but stability was not protected. Because under spikes and retries, when you discover users work late, the system has already spent capacity on work that should have never gone that far. So in order to protect our system, idempotency needs to be treated as a layered protection model, not as a single database exception at the end. So the first layer is early identity and screening. Extract the event and transaction identity as soon as possible, and stop obvious duplicates or wasteful work from consuming deeper resources. The second layer is in-flight protection. Reduce the chance that the same critical flow burns workers, connections, and transaction time concurrently under retries or spikes. And the third layer is the final source of truth guardrail. So the database or the business state transition still protects correctness, but it should be the last safeguard, not the first place we discover disorder. That is the key shift from reactive duplicate handling late in the flow to layered idempotency that protects both correctness and capacity. So if we translate this into a path to resilience, the direction becomes concrete. First, keep the synchronous path very small. Only keep the work that must happen before we can responsibly acknowledge the event. So verify the signature, validate the payload, extract the event identity, perform minimal durable acceptance, and apply early idempotency screening. Second, move work that does not need to block the response behind a message broker or a task boundary. This is where we separate and reevaluate our service boundaries. That includes downstream service calls that do not affect the immediate response, like notifications or retriable integration work and other slow side effects. The point is to decouple what does not belong in the hottest path of the system. So that is why I frame this as a path to resilience. Early idempotency protects capacity from waste, and broker tasks or consumers help reduce dependency drag by keeping non-response critical work out of the synchronous path. So the final takeaway is this. Traffic spikes are architecture audits. They expose what averages hide. They reveal hidden coupling. They punish late protection. And they show what does not belong in the critical path. In our case, this was a payment callback flow. But the broader lesson is much wider than that. Any critical path becomes fragile when it is tightly coupled to shared dependencies, contested infrastructure, and work that should not be there in the first place. So, if I had to reduce it to one line, it would be this. Resilience starts by keeping the critical path from depending on everything else. Thank you very much.